You all. So from today onwards, we are going to start a new series on GraphQL API testing. So earlier we have seen how we can test REST APIs using Postman and RestAssured. Now GraphQL is something new, a different kind of technology, and which is more trending nowadays. Basically, it is started from Facebook from 2012 onwards, and later on from 2015 onwards, it becomes officially open source. And later on, many companies started using this GraphQL. Okay, so let us try to understand what is GraphQL and how it is different than normal REST API calls, and what it is support, what it doesn't support, and how it looks like. Right, normally if it is a REST API, so we have a URL which contains endpoint, and we are sending the different type of HTTP request like get, post, okay, delete and update, and what type of operations GraphQL will support, and how we can retrieve the data, and how we can update and delete the data by using GraphQL queries. Okay, so first thing, GraphQL is a query language for the APIs, and let us see their official web page of GraphQL. And this is the definition they have given: a query language for your APIs. So if there is any API or which is developed using GraphQL technology, so we can query the data by writing the GraphQL. So GraphQL is basically a query language through those queries we can retrieve the data, or we can update the data, we can retrieve the data in the servers. So GraphQL is basically a query language, especially for APIs. And there is no relation with SQL. SQL is completely different. Structured query language is basically database related language, and a GraphQL is purely related to API. So it is a query language for retrieving the data from API. Okay, so how it will different from REST API, so that we need to understand first. So let me share something here. So if I look at here, REST and GraphQL. So REST APIs we already seen in the previous sessions. So in the REST APIs, normally we have URL which contains endpoint, and when you hit the URL, so we'll get some response from the server, and we will get the resource from the server. And if you want to get multiple resources, we have to send multiple requests. Right, so in the GraphQL, we do not need to send multiple type of request. With single request, we can get multiple resources from the server. So I'll show you more number of examples with practically. So first, let us try to understand what is the difference between REST and GraphQL APIs. So basically, they are totally different architecture level. They are completely different, and REST is especially having a different type of architecture, but GraphQL is having a different kind of framework, and which is basically a query language. REST is not a language. GraphQL is basically a query language. So in the REST, we have to send different type of HTTP request like get, post, put, patch, right? So these are all different type of requests, HTTP requests we have to send along with the URL. And in the GraphQL, we have only one type of request, which is post request. We have one type of request which we can do, that is post request. We do not have multiple type of request in the GraphQL. But why we need GraphQL, especially if we have a REST APIs, why exactly we need GraphQL? So in the REST APIs, before that, we need to just understand how exactly REST API works and how exactly GraphQL works. So let me show you an example to understand better. So if I just go to this site, so they have given a lot of information on this, how exactly REST APIs and works, and then Graph APIs work. And if you look at this REST API, this is the way of a REST API works. Suppose there are multiple resources are there in my server. Suppose I want to get a resource. For example, I want to find addresses of the users. So we need to send a two different type of request. So first request, I need to send an ID, and then I'll get the data from the server. And then we need to send another request. So while requesting, where I can request addresses where the user ID is so and so. So if you want to get multiple resources from the server, we need to send multiple HTTP requests. Okay, because there is no relation maintained internally if it is a REST API calls. But when you come to the GraphQL, so we can send only one single request, and we'll get the HTTP response. So instead of sending the multiple requests, we can send simple one request, post request, by writing the GraphQL query, and this particular query will fetch the data and return the response in the form of JSON. So that is a major advantage of using GraphQL. So in HTTP, in REST calls, we have to send multiple HTTP requests to get multiple resources. Whereas in GraphQL, we can send a single request to get multiple resources. So in HTTP, we have a client and we have a database server, and in between the APIs will work. So whatever the request URL we are sending, and it will hit the server and accordingly fetch the data from the database, and we will get the proper HTTP response. But in GraphQL, internally it will maintain something called GraphQL server. So in the GraphQL server, we have a component called resolver. So what that component will do is, whatever the query we have sent through the client, right? So it will collect all the fields. Like say, suppose if you look at this example, we are sending a query and which will retrieve the data of the user. So when I pass ID equal to 1, ID, name, address, these details will be fetched from the server. Okay, and let us say these ID names are maintained in one table or one database, and these addresses or streets are maintaining some other database. So this particular query will first hit the GraphQL server, and that GraphQL server contains a resolver that will capture the data from the multiple resources and consolidated the data and send it as a HTTP response. So that's how exactly GraphQL internally works. Okay, so that is the reason here the GraphQL server, which contains a resolver. So that particular component will take care of consolidating the data from the different sources and producing the final response to the client. But in case of HTTP, we do not have such type of things. So each and every request, as soon as it hit the server, and only that particular data will be fetched and will provide the HTTP response. So because of that, the main problem in this HTTP is overfetching and underfetching of data. Sometimes if you are requesting some things, unnecessarily we will get some additional information in the response. And sometimes when you're searching for some time, or when you're searching for some information from the server, sometimes you may not get the full-fledged information from the server. So that is underfetching the information. Sometimes it may overfetch the data, or sometimes you may get underfetching the data, underfetching response. So these are the problems which we have with the normal REST APIs. So that will solve by the GraphQL. So GraphQL will solve that particular problem because of resolver. So in the server side, the GraphQL will internally maintain the resolver, and that will consolidate all the data from multiple resources, and it will provide the proper HTTP response according to the client request. So if you look at this, these are the two different examples how exactly REST API works and how exactly GraphQL works. Now if I look at this, their official website, some more information they have provided how exactly it will work. So now we can see this is a GraphQL, basically they are sending, and whatever the fields we are specifying in this query, accordingly we will get the information as part of our response. So whatever we ask for the server, exactly the same information will be returned as part of response. So that is the speciality of GraphQL. But in case of HTTP request, sometimes we will get some unnecessary data which we don't use most of the times, and sometimes what happens, whatever data we really required, we may not get the data in the response. So that is a problem which we have in normal HTTP request if it is a REST APIs. But in the GraphQL APIs, whatever we ask exactly, it will return that response from the server. So that is the beauty of GraphQL. And you can see here, get many resources in a single request. In case of HTTP or REST APIs, so we need to send multiple requests to get multiple resources from the server. Whereas in GraphQL, we can simply send one request for getting multiple resources. So the data will be consolidated from the multiple resources by GraphQL server, and that will give you response to the client. So this is a beauty of GraphQL APIs. So if you want to write a GraphQL queries, that API should be defined or API should be developed by GraphQL. So then only we can write our own GraphQL queries. So there are so many UI, so many clients or so many playgrounds are available to test the Graph APIs and for writing GraphQLs and everything. So let me show you a simple example how we can write a GraphQL to get the data from the server. Okay, so these are the basic differences. Now, before going to show you how GraphQL exactly works, we need to understand three main important things from the GraphQL. The first thing is GraphQL queries and mutations and subscriptions. So these are the three important operations most of the times we do in the GraphQL. So as I said before, REST, we have multiple type of requests: get, post, put, delete, patch, and so many other type of requests which are there in the REST. But in the GraphQL, we have only one type of request, which is post. But how come we do, like suppose if you want to do CRUD operations, right? So create, update, delete, and retrieve. So if you want to do these type of operations, how it is possible? Only with the post request. So in the GraphQL, the mainly three types of operations are there. So by using queries, right, this is the GraphQL query, and this particular query we can use to retrieve the data from the server or to read the data from the server. So GraphQL query is specially for reading the or retrieving the data from the server. The other type of operation is called mutations. So exactly by writing the mutation type of query, we can write data into the server. We can update, we can delete, or we can create. So these type of operations we can do by using mutation type of operations. And the third one is subscription types. So when you update something or when you delete something, right? So if you want to get some response, so then you can go with the subscriptions. It will listen for data. So whatever operations you do, suppose you created something and then you will get something whether it is created or not. So that we can do by using subscription. So these are the three types of operations will be supported in GraphQL. In the REST, we have only multiple operations are supported, like we have get, update, delete, patch, and so on. But here we have only three types of operations, and queries will be covered. Like for reading the data, we can use queries. Mutations, by using this mutation type of operations, we can do delete, update, and create. And subscriptions, we can write this type of queries to get the live kind of data. Suppose when you do something, some operation, and immediately we'll get the response whether that is got created or not. So those type of operations which we can do by using subscriptions: queries, mutations, and subscriptions. So these are the three type of operations we can do in the GraphQL. So all three operations we can do by using only post request. So queries, mutations, subscription, all three are the queries only, GraphQL queries only, but type of query is different. For reading the data, we will write a query. For writing the data or for updating or deleting, we will write a mutation type of query. And for subscription, we can write subscription type of query. So these are three different type of operations we can do by writing three different type of queries in the GraphQL: query, mutation, and subscription. Now let me show you a few examples how exactly GraphQL works, how exactly we have to write our GraphQL query, and how it will get the response from the GraphQL server. So for that, there are so many websites are available for practicing. So I will use one website here, and which is very popular and which is very useful. So many types of GraphQLs are provided, and along with that, it is also provided a kind of explorer where we can write our own GraphQL. We can automatically generate our GraphQL, and also we can hit that GraphQL query and then we can get the response on the same kind of explorer. So later I will show you how we can test these GraphQL APIs in our Postman tool, and also by using RestAssured, how we can test this GraphQL. I will show you later. So for now, let me show you how exactly the GraphQL works. So let me just go to this URL, hasura.io. Okay, and here, this is a website, Hasura. This is very popular website. They are providing so many demo type of APIs. And if you want to use their APIs, open APIs, we need to first log in into this, and then we will able to access the APIs which are provided by this. So let me open this URL, and it is basically asking it will ask the login first time, because I already logged in. It will directly log in into the Explorer. So first time when you open this URL, it will open like this. We need to create a login for this, and once you log in this, and you will able to access the Explorer from this. And these guys are provided so many types of GraphQLs, and you can just look at here the QL queries and mutation and subscriptions and multiple things are provided here. So this will be very, very useful for us to test the GraphQLs, and we can also write easily all kind of GraphQLs. We can write normal GraphQL queries, mutations, subscriptions, everything we're able to write it here. We can get the response here. Okay, let me show you a simple example here first. So later I will show you how we can test them in the Postman tool also. First of all, let us try to explore this, how exactly GraphQL works. So here there are multiple queries are provided, right? So let me just select the users. So when I select this user, it is started generating the GraphQL. And in the users, there are multiple fields are available. Suppose I want to get user ID and name. So you can simply select this, and you can see this is a GraphQL query which is created. So basically, before writing this GraphQL query, we need to understand the schema, which is most important. So the schema means what? The schema says what type of data which we have in the server. So what kind of data we can request, what kind of data and what kind of fields we can update, what kind of fields we can delete, or what kind of fields we can access. Everything will be there in the schema. So by seeing the schema, we can understand all these things. So before generating or before writing the GraphQLs, we have to know what exactly schema. So here users I have selected and ID name. So this is automatically generated the GraphQL. So if you run this, it will automatically hit the server and get the data. You can just look at here. I have selected only ID and name with this GraphQL, and it is returned the data. So you can see for every user, ID name is got returned. So by selecting these options, we can automatically generate this GraphQL query. Okay. And suppose suppose when I say users ID name, I mentioned ID name I got. Suppose I want to get something else. So you can write your own query. Suppose I want to get the to-dos also from the user. So you can add your own to-dos like this. So once you add it, then you can just execute. Now you will get to-dos also. You can see in the to-dos, if I look at the to-dos, in the to-dos, there are again multiple options are there. So multiple subfields are there. So ID is by default selected. If I not selected, it will not get anything because the to-dos is a main field, so which contains again sub options. So now every order, you can see the first order there is no to-dos. For the second order, there are multiple to-dos are there. So for each to-dos, there is ID is got generated. And suppose I want to get title of every to-do, so I can just select title. So in the to-dos list, I mention the title. So when I execute this query, this will return the ID name along with the to-dos. So this is how we can automatically generate our GraphQL, and once we hit it, then we get the response in the form of JSON. So this is a very beautiful explorer, so where we can automatically select whatever fields we want from the GraphQL server, and this will automatically generate the GraphQL, and accordingly it will fetch the data. Suppose here if you look at these data, there are so many records are fetched from the server. So if you want to just limit it, you can simply select this limit, and limit is got applied. Okay, so now this data will be returned, only 10 rows will be returned. When I execute this, only 10 records you will get. So this is actually graph query means. So this will fetch the data from the different resources and consolidate that. Finally, we will get the response like this. So this is how exactly GraphQL works. So here there are multiple queries are mentioned here, and similarly mutations will be used for you can just insert the data or delete the data or update the data. So for performing CRUD operations, we can use mutations, and the creation will happen especially for retrieving happen through only query itself, and updation, deletion, and then creation will happen through mutation type of queries, and then the subscriptions will happen. Happen through this subscription type of queries. So these are the three different type of operations are provided by GraphQL. So this is very, very more effective, more flexible, and even performance wise very faster than REST APIs. Okay, so in the REST APIs, we need to write multiple requests to get multiple resources. But in GraphQL, we can send one single request and we will able to fetch the data from the server. So whatever data we are requesting, exactly we will get the same data. So that is the main benefit of using GraphQL. So just like RestAssured, we will not get any overfetched data. Similarly, we will not get any underfetched data when I use GraphQL. But when I use REST, sometimes you will get overfetching data, sometimes you will get unnecessary data, sometimes you will get the data which is not necessary. So this is the problem with the normal REST API, and that we can overcome by using GraphQL. So there are many companies started using this GraphQL, and so most of the APIs basically designed by using GraphQL. So that is the reason Postman also provided the support of testing GraphQLs. So we can write a GraphQL and we can test GraphQL APIs. Just by writing the GraphQL, it will automatically generate it, right? So the same kind of feature is also available in the Postman. And if you know the GraphQL syntaxes and everything, you can write your own GraphQL like this. Or even though if you don't know the syntax to how to write a GraphQL, which is provided very easy options, especially just like this, how you are able to see the UI here, Explorer, query editor, and the response. Similar fashion in the Postman also everything is provided in the Explorer, GraphQL Explorer. So there we can explore all kinds of GraphQL queries. Okay, so this is the introduction part. In the next video we will see what type of request we can send and how we can test these GraphQLs in the Postman tool. Okay, so that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.